The Rockpile Report, the pettiest, hardest drinking Bills podcast.
Welcome, everybody, to another edition of the AFC East Roundup podcast. I'm your host, Bills season ticket holder Drew Gear. That's my producer, Chris Kruger. And joining us tonight, 3 yards per carries, Alf Arteaga. You know him. You love him. Some of you have actually paid money just to try to heckle him. It's always good having Alf, and I feel like our listeners really do have a love-hate relationship with you. We're here talking about the Miami Dolphins offseason ahead of training camp. You know, we're doing our kind of... Chris, this is how I get back to football, right? Start taking a look around the league, especially taking a look around the division and trying to catch up with what's been going on with everybody. Just as our own training camp is about to take off and we start doing more football-centric conversation. Not just you and me getting drunk and making fun of people.
Well, a lot of it has to do with, you know, if you follow the national media is going to tell you the Jets have surpassed the Dolphins and Bills. But then you have to get people on that know what they're talking about within your division so you have a better understanding instead of listening to pundits like a Nick Wright or Emmanuel Acho. Idiots like those people.
And so with that, we bring Alf to the show so that we can start our AFC East Roundup pre-training camp preview. The first thing I want to ask you, Alf, biggest storyline for the Dolphins this offseason? Like, there's a lot of narratives out there. There's a lot of things that have changed. You've hired a new defensive coordinator. You've had some personnel turnover. You've got some guys who are injured who are going to have to try to work their way back from injury. But I think the biggest one is still kind of in the minds of Dolphins fans. Would I be wrong in saying it's probably what's going on with Tua's contract?
Yeah, that's been the biggest narrative all offseason. It's been Tua's contract. The other one is what's going to happen with Tyreek's 2026. So he's under contract for 2024 and under contract for 2025 on one of those void years. So he'll be here for 2 years. But what's going to happen for 2026 and what are they going to do with his money for 2025? That's another narrative. The main one, as far as team building, it has been those 1-year deals. Those 1-year deals that they went out and I advocated for, which if it blows up in the Dolphins' face, you can blame me because I've been advocating for this, and I said it on the first podcast of the offseason. I said, look, this is not going to be about keeping Wilkins or Hunt. This is going to be about finding a lot of good veterans on 1-year deals to fill out this roster where it's needed, and they've done a pretty good job of that. So those are the 3 major ones, but it all comes back down to Tua.
No, well, and I'll say this. What we saw from you guys in that sense is something that the Bills have been capitalizing on for the last 2-3 years, which is you've done they've been able to do a good job of going out and finding guys who wanted to come in and play for what they knew, even if they add void years like the Leonard Floyd contract last year. It was, hey, we know you've got talent. We just know we don't want to be married to you long term. Do you want to play for a contender? If you do, here's 1 year. And you'd be shocked at the number, if your team looks like it's progressing, the number of players who want to be a part of that. It shouldn't be surprising, I guess, right? Like if you're a veteran like Shaq Barrett, where else are you going? What are you going to do? It makes sense that a team that has a needed edge rusher goes out and gets a veteran edge rusher on a 1-year deal that doesn't cost much, because where else would he rather be? Back in Tampa? Even in the worst division in football, what's the future look like there? What's the hope? Who else? There's not a lot of other contenders or teams that could call themselves a contender for their division title, maybe even a Super Bowl contender. There's not a lot of teams that could say that don't already have their edge defender room fleshed out. So they don't have a need for a guy like that. So that's where, like, the Bills have been doing this on the offensive line, where their backups, they haven't really drafted a ton of backup offensive linemen because they don't have to. They find veterans who are willing to spend 1 year on a $2.5 million deal to sit the bench, maybe play, for a very good football team. And you guys are now in that cycle of recruiting those types of players. The Tua Tagovailoa contract situation as it comes to training camp, I have no illusions he's going to hold out. I'm assuming he's going to show up. He's going to continue. He's going to be a good soldier about this. Is it a little alarming to you, all the talk about how he's not being offered a market rate contract, when the statistics in a lot of, I know you've been a stan of his for a while now. You do the thing that I just don't have the time to try to fight/educate idiots on social media about things. But you go to war over this, where you point to the fact that if you're just basing it off numbers, he's got the numbers to support a market rate contract. Is it sort of alarming to you that they're not giving that to him, or they're at least not offering it yet?
They have a pattern for this that's gone back a very, very long time. And it's Chris Greer and Brandon Shore. They operate this way. I speculated that they're probably fighting over the structure of this deal.
Mm-hmm.
They probably want something that's similar to what Jalen Hurts got. And he probably wants something that's similar to what Jared Goff got. And those are two very, very different things. Mm-hmm. And it makes sense when you start thinking about the tax implications of Jalen Hurts' deal. I don't know who the hell told Jalen Hurts to sign that deal. He's getting a lot of money.
Not his accountant. That's for damn sure.
He's getting a lot of money, but his accountant has to have told him, like, you understand you're basically sending the government like $2 million every March, like unnecessarily because of this contract you signed. And maybe that's something they want to do because that's going to keep them, fat and happy cap-wise to be able to keep adding these one-year deals every single year. But maybe that's not something that Tua's looking for. My idea is this. I think that's probably something they're going to fight tooth and nail to the last second, probably right before training camp. They'll come to a compromise, and Chris Greer will cave spectacularly, is my guess on this.
All right. I mean, it's going to have to get done. I don't see that they have another choice because it's like we talked about. Like we did a show a couple weeks ago. We talked about marrying mid quarterbacks. But the downside is, hey, let's go just get another one. Ask any franchise besides the Green Bay Packers that has had a franchise quarterback and then tried to replace them. How does that go? You went with the Buffalo Bills. We know firsthand. We went 18 years not even making the playoffs. And even then when we broke the drought, the guy we had at a quarterback, we knew that wasn't good enough. So the very next year, after we broke the playoff drought, we drafted a quarterback. Like, Tyrod Taylor was never a serious consideration. So it's that thing that, like, if you have a guy that you think works, you could try to go out and hope that a Will Levis situation happens, and we don't even know if Will Levis is good enough. But you go out and you try to find that. But if not, you could be treading water for a very, very long time. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I'd say the Dolphins know this firsthand.
And I've explained it to Dolphin fans, the fire you are playing with, letting him play on that fifth-year option.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it can get pretty ugly this last season. And then the alternatives will make you look like a complete idiot. Like, I explained how there's a scenario where he forces his way out of here, and you end up paying more money for Dak Prescott.
Yeah.
How stupid would you look if you actually did that?
So with that in mind, this is the thing that's been bubbling on the lips of every Dolphins fans. Because I told you, I'm like, when he signs that deal, it's going to break the internet. It's almost troubling now that you're coming so close to camp and it's not happened yet. But again, other franchises figured out, the 49ers are notorious for getting into camp. Getting into the preseason, and then all of a sudden the guy gets a contract. It's just like that. Some teams want to operate that way. Now, when you talk about signings, let's start with this. What was your favorite defensive and offensive signing for the Dolphins this offseason?
Offensive signing, it's really two. It's Odell Beckham and Jonnu Smith. I like both. I think they both fit a very, very big need on this team. We saw last year, and we complained about it all of last year, that Dolphins really didn't have a third pass-catching option. Teams started figuring out, especially once Jalen Waddle started getting injured, and then Tyreek Hill got injured. Teams just were not respecting their options on the outside.
Nope.
And they went and they decided, we're going to fix our third down problem twofold. We're going to get a guy that's going to catch design passes in Jonnu Smith, and we're going to get a guy that can work the slot or work outside and allow Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle to work the slot on third down and Odell Beckham. So that's my favorite signings on offense. On defense, I really like what they did with Jordan Brooks. I've talked about this all the time. I think it's a huge upgrade over Jerome Baker, and I was a big Jerome Baker fan. But they've also done a lot of good work. Kendall Fuller as a replacement for Xavier Howard, I really do believe is an upgrade. First of all, he's available. Xavier Howard hasn't been for 3 years now. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I like give me Jordan Brooks and, of course, Odell Beckham and Jonnu Smith on offense.
I thought the Calais Campbell signing was interesting. I love Calais Campbell just as a player. I liked him when he first got into the NFL. When he was part of the Saxonville, just that monstrous defensive front that they had down there, he was just a fun player, and he's always the same thing, right? Like there's guys I think about when I think about the type of role he has, and it's like Haloti Ngata. Who are some of the other ones? Like I'm trying to think of these hard-nosed defensive tackles who just they can play a little bit of defensive end in like a 3-4 front, and they're just relentless. They're just hard, gritty. They're durable, and they love the game of football. And they play it, and they're grinders, and they're tough guys, and it's impressive. And adding a guy like him to that locker room, I think, is transformative because Christian Wilkins was a very good defensive presence for you guys in the line. Christian Wilkins also did a lot of things. I think Christian Wilkins is a very emotional player who plays football very emotionally, and that can be a positive and a negative. You saw times where he used, gamesmanship to get inside Josh Allen's head, but then just as often, it would be third down and the Dolphins are coming off the field and he shoves a quarterback behind the play. Or he's face masking an offensive lineman and it's just out of frustration and there's 15 yards and a new set of downs for the offense and you're looking at him going, you got to stop that. This guy's the antithesis of that. He is just a consummate professional, and having that in the locker room, having that around the rest of the team, around your Zach Sealers and stuff like that, I think it's a huge boon to every player on the defense, not just the defensive line.
Yeah, and it's also important to have somebody, what's the word I'm looking for? Be a prophet for Anthony Weaver. Like he came in every single press conference he gave, he said, "Look, I'm here because it's home." Because he took the minimum. He took the league minimum to play here for a year. Mm-hmm. Okay, so he was really productive last year, but every single answer he gave in his introductory press conference was about how Anthony Weaver's the guy who made a big impression on him, and he can't wait to work with him. And I wouldn't be shocked if you've listened to him speak this offseason. I wouldn't be shocked if they put the C on his chest. He's still a productive player, and I don't think he's going to play an outrageous number of snaps because they kind of built the interior defensive line to play a lot of different a lot of different guys, a lot of different snaps, in a lot of different roles. But he's going to play a pretty big role here.
No, and exactly. And every team needs those glue guys. And I feel like they're the people, and we're going to talk about this kind of later in the show, but when things go wrong and when adversity strikes, what you got to have is a couple guys in the locker room who have seen a lot of stuff and have that stable presence, who can be the calming voice inside of a room like that to say, look, even if I'm not going to lead by example out there on the field, I can lead through shared experience. I've been where you are. I've felt this. I understand that. Here's what you might be thinking, but here's how you have to clear your head, and you got to move forward, because if you don't, we'll die out here. It's that Al Pacino speech, right? We either heal now or we will die. Come together as a team and we will die as individuals. And have you ever noticed how shitty his fake acting voice got? Al Pacino?
Oh yeah.
If you think back to when he was doing Dog Day Afternoon.
Well, he decided that instead of inflection, he was just going to scream into the mic, and that was going to be the way he was going to emphasize a point in the scene. So
Dog Day Afternoon into The Godfather, he kind of had this nasally thing going on, and he had a New York accent, a Brooklyn thing he was trying to do. And then at some point, he turned into Big Daddy from Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. Yeah, cha-cha-cha. And he starts doing that. I'm like, who is this guy? Where did you come from? Chris, it would be like if I developed a Southern drawl all of a sudden. if I just started throwing out a hack Southern drawl.
Well, I have a hot take. My hot take is that Robert De Niro and Al Pacino, their last great performance was together in Heat. And then they somehow got together and said, you know what, we're cashing checks after this thing.
They stole so much money from production company after production company. You'd struggle to find, like, they haven't done a lot of strong movies. A lot of people hate Any Given Sunday. I don't mind it because, I mean, like, the football action sequences are terrible. Like, they're terribly conceived.
There's a very, very good movie in there if somebody would just, not drive Oliver Stone to the set for one day. So there's a really good football movie inside there somewhere,
I'm shocked they didn't find a way to get Robert De Niro involved in that. That's all that movie needed to be a real disaster.
I'm pretty sure he probably auditioned for a part in that, because they pretty much had everybody in that thing.
When you look at this roster, so you guys have some players that you guys are really comfortable with and that you're really happy you guys landed. When you look at the roster ahead of camp, though, like I'm looking at our lads, which is just always my go-to for depth charts, because it's simple. It lays it out a lot for you. It gives you kind of the rankings of where everyone goes. What's the one that jumps out to you as, hey, this might still be a problem?
Well, they're committed to their philosophy. And their philosophy is interior offensive line does not matter, but center does. So, and they've been doing that here. Look, they never paid Robert Hunt.
Nope.
I'm told that they offered him a well below market deal a year earlier. Then he goes and signs for $100 million. Okay. But they're kind of telegraphing what they believe. They spend their money on tackles and they spend their money on a center. And they don't care about guards. So they have a pile of them, So evidently they like them. But it's a philosophy. And, and they'll remind you of it too. Last year, Chris Greer said, you guys are much more worried about our offensive line than we are. And Mike McDaniel's like, we're going to have a good offense. And sure enough, how are you going to argue with the number one offense in the NFL?
You're going to have, okay. And now this is where, though. And as a fan of just the game of football, watching how you guys have built things the last couple seasons, I could have sworn you would have been players in the guard market this year. And to see them not do it. Now, you did go out and draft Paul, right? Patrick Paul, second round pick at tackle.
And he'll be, spoiler alert, they brought back Kendall Lamb, which is the guy that they really liked and who performed really well last year. Kendall Lamb is the backup to Austin Jackson and Teron Armstead.
But this isn't a bad thing, because now you have a rookie who can actually sit and just marinate.
Yeah, this is supposed to be a redshirt year, and he's the emergency guy, behind Kendall Lamb.
Because eventually what you'd like to see him do is own one of those tackle jobs, because let's face it, you guys haven't had true stability at tackle in a long time. Like Austin Jackson finding himself saved you guys, because otherwise you were running the risk of repeating what you've seen for a decade, which is just tackles rotating. And I remember, 2 years ago, not this past season, but 2022, I think you guys had 4 different players, maybe 5 start games at right tackle. And it was and it's because of this philosophy where they were like, okay, we didn't care, but now I guess we have to care about tackle because of the structure of the offense. So we'll care about this for once, but we don't really mind what goes on in the middle. I feel like that's a mistake. And I think that late in the season, when you see certain things when your wide receivers all of a sudden can't get open as fast as they did because they're nursing certain injuries, you might need protection to hold up. Or you might need to feel comfortable in them enough to switch to the run because you've got a stable of running backs. And not being able to trust them in that way hurts you. And that's why when I look at the offensive line for the Dolphins, I go, they're doing the thing again. They're doing the thing again where Lester Cotton is this close to getting onto a football field for you guys. How mad were you when he played for you last year?
Well, I talked about it all year. I don't think that he's a starter level offensive lineman in the NFL.
No, he shouldn't be anywhere near the field.
He got busted down again because they brought back Isaiah Wynn, but what happened last year? We had a pretty stable, as stable as you can have, offensive line until Isaiah Wynn got hurt. Everybody keeps talking about, the Armstead injury and then the Connor Williams injury. Go look at what happened after the Isaiah Wynn injury. All hell kind of broke loose. Because now they were playing guys off the street at guard, namely Lester Cotton. And he played some consequential snaps, Lester Cotton did. People forget, 30-yard touchdown got called back against Philadelphia because of a Lester Cotton holding call.
And it was an egregious holding. Like, that's not even one you can argue with where you're like, oh, the refs were just looking to throw a flag. That's one where you have to look at that guy and go, what, Lester? What are you doing?
And he didn't need the hold because Tua was getting rid of it really, really quickly to Tyreek on a seam pass. So, there was no read there. It was just Tyreek was one-on-one and Tua was throwing it to the back of the end zone and it found Tyreek Hill for a touchdown. And sure enough, as soon as he threw it, I'm like, they're going to call Lester Cotton for a hold here because I saw a helmet snap back on the way to Tua. So
It's just, they've done the thing again. And so now what you have to do if you're a Dolphins fan is cross your fingers and say, look, we think we can be good, but Isaiah Wynn goes down and you're back to Lester Cotton and Liam Eichenberg being the next man up. And I don't know what that looks like. You know what it looks like. I don't know. You have to hope that Aaron Brewer, who is a very athletic center, hopefully he can stabilize things a little bit. But God forbid anything happens to him. Because behind him, now you're putting, Liam Eichenberg back in there? The depth on this team is alarming.
They did an odd thing, and something that I kind of support. I felt that they needed to get specialists as backup centers and keep one on the practice squad and keep one on the roster. They went out and they signed a guy that I don't know how this guy went undrafted, but Matthew Jones of Ohio State. He plays center. He's now a backup center. And Ireland Brown, another guy, I believe he played at Syracuse, was a center. He's also on the roster. So they got 4 actual centers on the roster when last year they had 1. And then they cross-trained Liam Eichenberg to do it as a backup. So I would guess that Liam Eichenberg is still somewhere in those plans as an emergency center. But they have 2 other guys that, that they're going to try in training camp to see if they can hold down a spot.
It's just...
I am actually a little optimistic on Matthew Jones. He has pretty good tape at Ohio State.
I mean, you have to hope. Who's the last good center to come out of Ohio State? Because I feel like I remember the Bengals ending up with one, and I thought he was going to be
Billy Price.
Billy Price.
Billy Price.
And he was terrible.
Yeah.
I think he was
okay. Billy Price was okay.
Nah, I don't know. I feel like he found his way.
Is he still in the league?
I believe so. I think he's bouncing around somewhere.
Yeah. That's usually what... Have you ever noticed this trend? Like, Ohio State offensive linemen tend to... who's the last one who was like a flagship player for a team? They get drafted fairly high. I just don't know ones that turn out to...
Oh, there's one. There's one right now. The guy that the Colts took, Paris Johnson.
Paris Johnson? Okay.
Yeah, I think he's going to be good. That guy's going to be a stud. He had a pretty decent rookie season.
Billy Price. Here it is. Bengals 2018 to 2020, Giants 21, Raiders practice squad 22, Cardinals also in 22, Saints practice squad in 23, Dallas Cowboys practice squad also in 23. And it seems that he is unsigned and not playing. So there you go, Billy.
Billy Price.
There's your centers from Ohio State.
I'm looking at this here, and you have 21, Josh Myers gets drafted by the Green Bay Packers. I'm looking at the list of Ohio State Buckeyes just drafted ever, and I'm looking for linemen. Wyatt Davis, guard, went to the Minnesota Vikings. Maybe. Okay. Nicole Nicholas, if I called him Nicole, is that the time that what's-his-face, who was the guy who called Chris Everett Chrissy?
Oh, Jim Rome.
Jim Rome?
Yeah.
If I'd called him Nicole, would he just fold me up like a ham sandwich? Like he'd knock the table over and just fold me up the way Chris Everett was going to do to Jim Rome? No, I'm looking at this, and besides Paris Johnson, DeJuan Jones.
He's going to be okay. He played pretty good for Cleveland last year.
He wasn't bad. You've got some guys, but historically it has not been kind to these guys. It's not.
I don't remember too many of them working out from Ohio State.
Now, what camp battle? Because here's one of the things I think, like, normally I'd look at it and say, okay, there's edge rushers. You guys got some. They're going to fight for playing time. One of the things is going to have to be focused on the rehab of these injured players of yours. First of all, where are your defensive ends and your pass rushers in terms of their rehab right now?
Well, there's 11 days until training camp, so we will know more then. But both are vowing to play week 1. And if you've seen any of the pictures of Jalen Phillips in the gym, he looks like a superhero. But he didn't hurt his pecs or his abs or his biceps, right?
Yeah.
He hurt his Achilles. So we shall see. They have so much, and now that they got Calais Campbell can also moonlight a little bit as a 5-tech.
Yep.
So he's going to help them in that regard. I'm interested to see if all of that is true. Bradley Chubb was last seen. He's the only one who's been seen running. He was running at camp about a week ago, and everybody was speculating, oh, he's coming back, and he keeps telling everybody, I'm playing week 1. But notice that they're saying, I'm playing week 1, and they're not saying, I'll be ready for camp.
Yeah. And
because none of these guys really want to be ready for camp.
And also, this is the Von Miller thing. This is why it's interesting to me. We watched this same thing play out last year with Von Miller, who goes, I'm going to be back. I'm going to be ready. Week 5, he goes out there. He plays. When he suits up and he's dressed for our loss to the Jaguars in England. And then he proceeds to suit up for every game and make zero impact. And everyone's mad about it. They're like, well, why is he out there? He's taking up snaps away from other players who could at least be serviceable. Maybe provide something of an impact play here or there. So then you fast forward to the end of the year, and he rides it out, and everyone says, okay, he almost had a sack on Patrick Mahomes in the playoff game that we lost. It got called, we would have stood, or Chris, I think, what was it? He made a disruptive play, and it got called back, or it didn't count because of a penalty. But whatever the case is, now he's trying to do this like revisionist history thing where he goes, oh, I'm mad because I was terrible last year and I shouldn't have been playing, and I don't think that the disrespect I'm being given is warranted. And it's like, whoa, wait a minute. You were the one who got on your own podcast behind a microphone and decided to tell everybody that you were healthy and ready to go. Don't put your own ass out there, and don't say that you wrote a mouth that your ass couldn't cash. You wrote a check that your ass couldn't cash, and now you're, trying to make us feel bad that we're mad at you for doing it? Because I guarantee you, if he wasn't healthy, McDermott, if he had said, hey, Sean, I don't feel good, Sean wouldn't have put him out there. So with that in mind, I think about the pass rushers for the Dolphins and what they're currently going through in this talk about it. We're going to be ready for week 1 no matter what. You might be able to get the uniform on and go out there. But at the same time, is there any concern on your part that they might pull a Von Miller and almost, like, now you're taking away snaps from players who can actually make explosive plays?
Yeah, I think that they have a very, very serious consideration here with Jalen Phillips. And I think they've been cautious in the past, and I would say that they would be cautious once again here because that was the quickest exercise of the 5th-year option I've ever seen this team ever do. And Chris Greer is one of these guys that always takes everything to the last second. I remember when they put the 5th-year option on Christian Wilkins, they did it at the deadline because there were people on OnlyFans asking us, they haven't done it yet. Are they actually going to let Christian Wilkins just walk after 4 years? And I'm like, trust me, they're going to exercise the 5th-year option. And sure enough, it was like 11 p.m. The beat writer started saying the Dolphins have notified Christian Wilkins they're picking up the 5th-year option. And I'm like, damn, they really took it to the last hour of the deadline. Jalen Phillips, they already picked up his 5th-year option. That's in 2025. He's under contract for 2024. remember that Bradley Chubb's big money comes online on 2026. So it kind of stands to reason you could move off of Bradley Chubb in 2026 as you hand the bag over to Jalen Phillips. Now, I've explained to people, because everybody has it in their head, we could get a team-friendly deal with Jalen Phillips. That's not how that works.
The pass rushers don't give team-friendly deals anymore. That doesn't exist.
You're not going to buy damaged goods here because he doesn't think he's damaged goods. He thinks he's a 24-year-old that is going to come back and move and get right back to what he was doing before he had the injury. And if you've seen what he looks like, you'll believe him, right? So Jalen Phillips is precisely the kind of guy that's going to bet on himself, and he's going to say, I'll take your 50-year option because you already put it on me, but I'm playing for that $25, $30 million a year. And I'm going to go blast off 15 sacks. And how am I going to blast off 15 sacks if I could possibly get hurt in 2024? Well, I think that they'll be cautious with his snap count this year, and then they'll play him on his 50-year option in 2025, and that'll be his contract year, where he's going to try to get paid the bag.
I mean, you're talking about a team-friendly contract. AJ Epinesa just signed a 2-year, $12 million. I was looking for the details. $10.6 million guaranteed. This is a rotational depth defensive end who just had a good year. He had 6.5 sacks, and if you want to say that, hey, we're buying the upswing, I don't think so. I think that what you saw was probably his ceiling. But at the same time, that's not bad for $10.6 million guaranteed over 2 seasons.
Yeah, and I laugh at Dolphin fans that said, throw him $15 million a year. And I'm like, you understand that if I'm Jalen Phillips, I'm laughing you off the phone? People forget what he was doing when he got injured. He was unblockable. Lane Johnson had not given up a sack in 4 years. You heard that correctly. Lane Johnson had not given up a sack in 4 years. He gave up 2 to Jalen Phillips in 1/2.
Like, if you go down what some of these people are signing, right? Like, annual average value, Gabe Davis is getting $13 million a year. Jalen Phillips is going to give you 15?
Now, Jalen Phillips is getting a minimum of $25 million a year, and more likely than not, he's going to ask for a full $30 per year. You're talking about $85 million guaranteed, something like that. Like on a $125 million deal.
That's one of the most interesting things when it comes to pass rushers, and I think that you have a really good understanding of this, and I think it's something that the Bills fans listening to this podcast need to wrap their heads around. The problem with pass rushers, because we have our own, Greg Rousseau is going to be coming up for a deal here, and I think the contract that he signs is going to shock a lot of people. And you're going to realize that the money, despite never being in the upper echelon of the game, in terms of pressures and sacks, and he's not Jalen Phillips. They're 2 very different players. Because Jalen Phillips wouldn't fit the role that we have Greg Rousseau currently playing. Right now we have Greg Rousseau playing a role where he is the edge setter in a 4-3 defense. And he is stout. He is one of the best at that role in the NFL. And at the same time, he gives you a little bit. He gives you pressures. He gives you quarterback hurries here and there. He's never going to be a sack artist, right? But where did you draft him? You drafted him in the back half of the, I think with the, Chris, am I wrong, 30th pick?
I think it was
first round?
I think it was like 27.
30th, it's somewhere in there. 30th pick, yeah. They would have had to make the title game. It would have been the late 20s. But either way, you're talking about a player who you drafted in the late 20s who's been a very solid, productive player.
Surprisingly, you're correct.
Yes!
30th overall in 2021.
See? I'm not always, I'm an idiot, but I know a few things. You're not going to, when you're talking about the Micah Parsons, the Myles Garrett, the blue chip players who you see playing defensive end and pass rusher, who are putting up these gaudy statistics at defensive end or outside linebacker, most of them are being taken 15th in the draft or higher. Alf, where was Jalen Phillips drafted?
I believe he was 18th, right? Is that correct?
So he was just outside the 20s.
Yeah, but remember that was a season that was very heavy on wide receivers and offensive linemen. He was the first pass rusher off the board at 18.
Chris is nodding in agreement. You are absolutely correct, sir. So my point...
And if you remember that year, because we had heavy debates on this, I was Simon and I were big Jalen Phillips guys. It was the opposite. Me and Chris were big Jalen Phillips guys, and Simon was kind of like Kwity Paye a little bit. He liked a few of the other guys a little bit more. And I remember that we were looking at the consensus, and it was almost right across the board. Jalen Phillips was the number one pass rusher on the board. He just had, an injury concern from UCLA.
Yep.
Which, to be honest with you, fits him right in here in Miami.
What I'll say is this, guys. The Bills won't, as long as Josh Allen is our quarterback, we will never be drafting in the top 10. Unless Josh goes down for a season, in which case Mitch Trubisky's going to come in and everything is fucked. And then at that point, yeah, maybe we're drafting with a top 10 pick. And then you can talk about getting a pass rusher. Otherwise, you're going to draft him. You're going to draft an AJ Epinesa and re-sign them. You're going to draft Greg Rousseau and you're going to re-sign him. And you're going to give him contracts that will shock people with the amount of money that these non-upper echelon defensive ends and pass rushers are getting paid. And then you have to go make the Von Miller move. You have to go make the Leonard Floyd move. You have to go do all these things. And the reason you have to do it is because you're a victim of your own success. And so in this way, Miami is going to find itself in a position where as long as they're making the playoffs and flirting with divisional contention, let's say this year they win the AFC East, it's going to put them that much farther down the road towards drafting another Jalen Phillips. So they're going to have no choice but to come out and pay that guy. They traded for Bradley Chubb and had the ability to pay him because they weren't paying anybody else. Now the team has improved. You can't pay pass rushers anymore. You just can't.
Yeah, and it's kind of obvious what they're doing, right? Like they're doubling down on the position because they believe in it. Chris Greer will, it's obvious what he believes in. He believes in edge rushers, cornerbacks, and wide receivers. Those are the people he pays.
Yep. And so what he's doing is he's got one lined up now, making big money in Bradley Chubb. He drafted another one. He's going to field them at the same time as long as they're both healthy. He'd like to transition that money, to your point, to the next guy, and then probably try to draft another one. The problem with that philosophy is if the Dolphins are actually good, you're going to have a hard time drafting that second guy. So now you're trying to find a trade partner, and you're trying to say, okay, who's a guy on a struggling team with a cap number we can make work? It becomes much harder to maintain really good pass rushers at the same time, much less a whole room of them, as long as you're also paying wide receivers. And oh, by the way, you have to pay your quarterback at some point, or not. But you're going to have to do something here. And so that's been one of the most interesting storylines of this to me is this pass rush room feels like you're on the edge of something. It feels like this year, if Jalen Phillips can actually come back and be healthy, you have something here between Chop Robinson's rookie year. I assume he'll probably start. He could have a fast start and then fade like a lot of college players do, but it wouldn't matter because he's got enough backup around him. You also have enough there between Bradley Chubb, Shaq Barrett. You've got veterans. You've got a nice mix of rookies. You bring in Jalen Phillips, you guys easily have... The Jets' pass rush is really good, but you guys are right up there. You were last year in terms of sack percentage, and I feel like that would get better with this group, but you're at the tipping point of something, and going into next season, you're not going to be able to afford to make it this way. So you almost have to take advantage of it now, right?
Yeah, and they have a lot of versatility at the edge. I could see a scenario where they start the season with Calais Campbell and Shaq Barrett on the edge if Bradley Chubb and Jalen Phillips can't go, and they have Chop Robinson and Mo Kamara as the backups to those two guys.
Mo Kamara. You want to talk about...
I'm still mad that you guys got him.
I'm furious because that was a guy who I loved watching him as a player. He was fun. I got to know him because of that ESPN Classic Colorado State game. And just how Mo Kamara was single-handedly ruining everything that the Colorado offense was trying to do.
Yeah, that's when I was sold on him. And if you see him in person, he's really an impressive kid, by the way. And he's kind of funny, he's a good interview. I can't wait to speak to him in training camp. that was a hell of a draft pick. That was a hell of a draft pick, and and I advocated for him. And they actually got him a little later. I wanted to make a trade to get a 4th-round pick to use it on Mo Camara. They ended up making a trade to use a 4th-round pick on Jalen Wright, and then just said, we'll take Mo Camara in the 5th anyway. So they outdrafted me. So that's always a good thing. But I have high hopes for Mo Camara.
Now to kind of
People
wrap
are asking,
this,
you lost AVG, man. How are you going to replace AVG? Well, there he is. That's Andrew Van Ginkel's replacement.
So I think the pinnacle of this entire conversation, though, it has to kind of be here. There's a lot of changes, right? There's personnel changes. We've just talked about the new faces you guys brought in, some of the draft picks you guys made, and Chop Robinson, Mo Camara, the fact that your defensive end room and that your cornerback group now has good, physically reliable outside corners, the fact that you have some pieces, what you feel is an upgrade at linebacker, you think that your defense is ready and that it's actually potentially better than it was last year. I look at the coaching staff, and I feel like that's kind of it's one of the biggest question marks for every single AFC East opponent the Buffalo Bills are going to see this year. Every coaching staff has a question mark somewhere. We have our own, which we're going to talk about on our own shows, but for the sake of conversation tonight, you guys have a new defensive coordinator. Last year, all I kept hearing was that Vic Fangio was actually the best free agent signing Miami had. They go, oh, Vic Fangio, this is the reason it's going to work. This is the reason that all these pieces are going to get put in a concert. That we got Jalen Ramsey, we got Ramsey, we've got Fangio. He knows how to use cornerbacks. Everything's going to be cool. Let's go win the division. And it worked sometimes. I mean, they forced a lot of turnovers. Again, second in the NFL in sack percentage behind the New York Jets. That's nothing to sneeze at. That's an impressive statistic. But you were 0-2 against the Buffalo Bills. Had some really dubious showings down the stretch when it mattered because there was a lot of injury, but also an inability to get what you needed out of the backups. And we saw a Buffalo Bills team that had to go literally to street free agents to start a playoff game. And they found a way to make it work and win that football game. There's some things that I think Fangio could have done better. I just think it wasn't, it was sold to us as NFL fans that this was the piece. So now you have a new defensive coordinator and it's being talked about as like, hey, we're going to do this thing. Why am I supposed to believe that this defense is going to be better with a new person at the helm, even with all the new pieces?
Because he's saying the right things, I would say. Last year, there was something bubbling up under the surface all season long with Jalen Ramsey. He wanted to be, he wanted to travel and play in the slot. And for whatever reason, they just left him out there on the boundary the entire season. And I could almost see that conversation with Chris Greer and Vic Fangio going something like this. Chris Greer saying, look, I just traded a 3rd-round pick and I just gave this guy $23 million. Use my expensive $23 million cornerback. Put more on his plate. And Vic Fangio was just refusing. This year, the first thing that Anthony Weaver said is he's playing everywhere. He's playing in the slot. He's playing the star position. He's going to play safety. We're going to use him pretty much everywhere on the field. So that should be an improvement. We do know that they play, because that's another thing. He was asked what his system entails, and he says basically what we ran in Baltimore, which is a lot of cover 3 and some even fronts to stop the run. I put a study on 3YPC, our Twitter account, which is the number 3 yards per carry, which is, I was essentially trying to prove that Zach Sealer was just as good as Christian Wilkin was at stopping the run in even fronts. And what I did was I tossed out every single play where Wilkins was double teamed or Raekwon Davis was double teamed, because neither one is here, right? And I basically just kept in plays where they were blocked one-on-one. And the run was essentially designed to double team Zach Sealer. And I put up those numbers. They gave up 51 yards on 28 carries in the entire season. And the sample size was both Buffalo games, both Kansas City games, the Baltimore game, the Dallas game, and the Raider game. So I was putting in the best run games that they faced and the best teams. And their even fronts were just good. They were just good against everybody, no matter who was in there, whether it was Deshaun Hand or Zach Sealer. Well, that's something that they're going to do more of this year. So they're going to do something that they didn't do as much last year, more this year, and they're going to use Jalen Ramsey in the slot. So that should improve the defense somewhat.
I also like the acrimony.
The added depth alone should be.
I also like the acrimony on the way out the door. Like, it's like, I hate to say it like this, but it's one of the most Miami things ever, where they're like, hey, this guy's going to be the man. And then he leaves and all the players are like, yeah, that guy sucked. There's guys who are openly talking about, like, I don't respect that guy. You're like, wait a minute, what the hell happened?
Javon Holland did the weirdest thing. I don't know if you remember the video that he posted. There's no way that he could come out and say that had nothing to do with Vic Fangio. When he posted the video on Twitter, within minutes of Fangio being let go,
exactly,
which was the video of Javon Holland punting rocks. You remember it?
Yes.
Everybody's like, he just posted a video saying, kick rocks. And it was within minutes of Fangio being let go.
And it's also funny that if you were to Google it, like I did, because I just wanted to see, I'm like, was he fired? No. Because I'm like, how did they try to characterize that? Mutually parted ways. And you go, wait a minute. So some of your defensive players, some of your better young defensive players are really comfortable taking to social media and kind of telling this guy to get lost publicly in front of millions of people after you mutually parted. That doesn't sound mutual. It doesn't sound like it was an agreed upon thing. Why was it characterized like this, do you think?
I think to make the, severing the ties easier, and maybe it has something to do with his contract or how they were going to pay out what he got paid. He essentially just got paid 1 year he got paid $4.5 million for 1 year. That's what he got paid. And they voided the second year of his contract because he had signed a 2-year contract when he got here. So maybe that's what they did. It was also really interesting that as soon as he got fired, Jalen Ramsey takes to not even social media. He did an interview where he said, no, that wasn't working. And then Omar Kelly, who does a fabulous job on the beat, says the entire defensive room, there was a revolt, and that revolt lasted from like week 1 to the playoff game. Like, there was never, even when things were going well, and supposedly players were freelancing, we had a mess on our hands on defense. And, Fangio wasn't too happy with some of the talent that we handed him. That, they were good players, but they were not players he was very good at handling, let's just say.
Well, hopefully Anthony Weaver can do better. And I guess you have to hope the same is true of your head coach. Now, Mike McDaniel, he's not a bad coach. First of all, he's a very intelligent person, and you can tell what he's taken away from his time spent with the 49ers, because he runs a very complex offensive system that is designed. You can't argue with the results. He showed up here to coach a Miami football team whose offense had been, what was it under Flores? Like, where were they? They were middle of the pack at best. Their offense was
worse than that. They were 25th in 2021. The 2 years that he's been here, the offense ranked number 2 and number 1 with Tua Tagovailoa at quarterback. If you put in all the backup quarterbacks, they rank number 6 and number 1.
He has
ranked third in scoring and second in scoring. So
one of the craziest things is watching his understanding of spacing and just timing. And that's what the Miami Dolphins offense is. It's space and time. And when you can create that space and then fill it up with some of the fastest players in the NFL, that's a recipe for success. And good for him for figuring that out. The problem is that being an NFL head coach, it's bigger than just, hey, I know the X's and O's better than you do. It's being able to coach your team through adversity. It's also being able to understand where sometimes even because he's his own play caller, sometimes some of your own proclivities could hurt you, especially when people know them. Like when people start to figure out, hey, in this scenario, this is what Mike likes to do. You need to be able to have a pivot. This is the thing that makes Andy Reid so special. Andy Reid is one of these guys who he can throw the kitchen sink at you one game. And you think like, okay, I've seen every look. I've seen every formation. This is nuts. He can play another game against you, and it's a whole different approach using the same formations, and you can't prepare for it. It's why the Buffalo Bills can have really good showings against him in the regular season in terms of our defense going back and forth and forcing punts and doing things. I mean, Chris, what was the game last year? It was 17-14 or something stupid like that. I don't think either team got to 21 points in that game where we won in Kansas City. But with that said, you go into the playoffs, and now what he's going to show you is something completely different with the same room of players. And he has that to him as a coach. Mike McDaniel, whether it's fair or not, has to find that. He also has to figure out how to defer to some of the better parts of his roster and also just be the CEO of the football team. Like, this is what I see. 2 years in a row, your bid for the inside, you guys have the inside track, and your bid for the AFC East title slips away in dramatic fashion. It's not even easy. It's always like everything comes down in fire and brimstone. It's ugly, right? At the end of every year when it turns out Miami didn't win the AFC East, it's not because of like, we tried and we fought, but we were behind and we just couldn't catch them. You guys have the lead, and then slowly it just slips away, and then something awful happens. And it's usually a game against Buffalo, and that's where it falls apart. Number one offense in the NFL over 18 weeks last year, but you averaged 18 points in those final 3 must-win games. I look at that and I go, this is a guy who's proven that he has a system that works. Injuries, you can point to that, but at the same time, you allowed that to happen. You had no pivot. You kept running the same system with, it's like when you try to drive your car on a spare. And you go, how far can I get with this spare tire? It says 50 miles. Well, I'm on mile 70, but it's not flat yet, so I can keep rolling. And some of that is Chris Greer's construction of the roster. Some of it's the way that Mike McDaniel chose to deploy players in specific situations. You pair that with a defense that if you take the Jets game out, which I don't count, when you start Trevor Siemian off the street, I don't count that game. 426 yards per game on defense being allowed. But that was about what was going on over the course of the season. You guys had ups and downs, but you could get by because your offense was scoring 25, 30 points a game. This guy has to figure out how to compose that locker room. And the problem is this offseason, what I'm seeing from him is a lot of talk about intentional stuff. Like, hey, we're being very intentional about the use of, the number 24? Because he goes, that's the number of years it's been, or years it's been since we won a playoff game. That shouldn't be where your focus is. I feel like that makes it's a nice clip. It's a nice buzz thing to throw out there for the media. Behind the scenes, that's a guy who needs to be figuring out, okay, who on my staff can check me when I'm wrong? Who on my staff can check me when it's like, hey, we have this stable of running backs? Because of the way I've built my team, I don't trust them to run the football effectively. So in games when I have the lead, like I'm playing Buffalo at home, maybe I should stop throwing the ball. Maybe I should lean into this run for an entire drive or two and just see what happens. Because right now their defense isn't tackling well and they're missing linebackers, and maybe something might happen for me. Are you with me in this? That I think the biggest thing that has to happen and that we need to see over the course of, if you're talking from a Dolphins fan perspective, we need to see for you guys to take that next step is Mike McDaniel has to mature a little bit as a head coach.
Well, yeah, they had a talent deficiency that they addressed in spades this offseason on the offense. They needed that third pass catcher. Now they have too many of them almost. Okay? Malik Washington looks fabulous. He's a guy who should contribute, and Taj Washington as well. So you have the Washington brothers, you have Odell Beckham, you have Jonnu Smith. So, and Jody Forston has, looks like $1 million as well. Anytime you see a 6'6", 250-pound guy out there at tight end and he can jump through the roof, that's gonna get you a bit excited. So they addressed that issue. The one thing they didn't address was expanding the playbook as far as running the football in 12 personnel or in 22 personnel by running leads or power. Like, they didn't expand the playbook that way, but they did expand the playbook as far as playing 11 personnel and getting a fullback off the field, although they're pretty good in 21 personnel with Alec Ingold. So they expanded their formation repertoire and they fixed their third wide receiver problem. What's going to be interesting to see is how the play calling changes because of that. You have an expanded playbook now. You have more talent. What's that going to mean? What's that going to look like?
Because I'll tell you what I see when I hear you saying this. All I can picture is Miami Dolphins, San Francisco 49ers, and a game where he decides to go for it on 4th down and calls up a pass to Mike Gesicki, who is one of the most maligned pass catchers on your entire team, and doesn't the ball just bounce off his hands and fall incomplete out of bounds? And he's there. It's a face we've all gotten to see. Us as Bills fans, we think it's hilarious. Him just open mouth, kind of staring up like, fuck, come on, that couldn't have had, come on. It's that face. He's got to learn not to put himself in those positions. Find higher percentage plays, and I don't know if that's maybe having a quality guy or having an offensive coordinator, even if it's just in title only, who can get in his ear in those moments, and him having the willingness to listen and use this. You've got better talent now. You have to leverage it, because I've seen a lot of stubbornness from him on that front. And I think that it's ultimately what leads, in a lot of cases, to your team's downfall eventually.
Yeah, I think sometimes it's as simple. He's very self-aware when he's asked these questions about, what he needs to improve, because, he's pretty clear about it. And he says sometimes you get into a rhythm and you can see it on the sidelines. Like, he'll use the same play in 2 or 3 different variations. And he's very fond of saying it's not that they stop it, it's that they just don't know it's coming again, because I'm showing them a different look every time I use it. He needs to get in some type of rhythm on 3rd down, because that's been really his downfall. He's produced good offense, and his scripts in every single game to start games are sublime. But his issues have been late in games when he's had to actually dig into the playbook to find something that's going to work, because now they're working on something else. And you kind of saw him get to some of those things, and then he would just walk away from it, or he'll get away from it. You saw him against the Cowboys figure out a few things down the stretch against them. And you saw it against the Chiefs the first time around, where he decided, I'm gonna start running it out of almost empty sets and using 11 personnel to run Mostert wide, because I think I could hit that block out there with Teron Armstead. And he ran that play 3 times in a row to get them down there to the 25-yard line to tie the game late in the game. And Mostert ran off for about 55 yards on those 3 runs. So he's capable of it. He just needs a little bit more consistency. Just to put a bow on everything you just said, as you were talking, I went to teamrankings.com. Last season, now for the last 2 years, the Buffalo Bills have led the NFL in 3rd down conversion percentage. Yeah, Miami's one of the worst.
Not one of the worst, but here's what's, I think, notable. You guys were 12th last year over the course of the entire season, 12th in the NFL. Despite having the number 1 offense, you were only 12th in terms of 3rd down conversion percentage across the last 3 games of the season. Okay? Buffalo was 3rd with 51%. Do you know where Miami was?
I would say that they were last.
They were 5 from the bottom of the league. Their conversion percentage was 29.7. So here you are, you're the league's number 1 offense, your third down conversion rate tanked at the end of the year. Go back to 2022, his first season. Buffalo is once again, for the entire season, number 1 in the NFL in third down conversions. Miami was 24th, right? And down the stretch, when they needed it, they were second to last in the NFL. This is a real problem, especially late in the season, where when it comes to third downs, it's like, look, man, we can give you all the pieces in the world. You got to figure out how to find consistency with them, especially when people figure out it's coming. Because to your point, early on, you can show them things, and I can get tricky and run formations and all the spacing bullshit that I can put together. But you put that stuff on tape, and people eat that tape up, and eventually you have to have pivots, and you have to be able to keep reinventing. And if you can't, you find yourself in Mike McDaniel's shoes, staring up as the Buffalo Bills are hanging another AFC East Championship banner, going, what do I got to do? What do I have to do? And it's like, Mike, it starts with you, man. It starts with you. I can't wait to see what the Miami Dolphins-Bills rivalry looks like this year. Camp is going to get started, and I'm sure there's going to be all kinds of stuff, especially when Tua signs that contract. When it happens, I still maintain it. It's going to break the internet one way or the other. The Tua fanboys are going to be upset. The Tua haters are going to be... Everyone's going to have a take. It's going to be fun times. I can't wait to get back together with you more often throughout the course of this offseason, into the regular season as we restart the AFC's roundup shows. Why don't you tell everybody what you guys are going to be working on this offseason throughout training camp?
Well, we do this every single year. If you want to become a member of our Discord, you could go to discord.gg/OnlyFans. You can become a member there for $3 a month. But if you want to listen to my camp reports, I give you daily camp reports. It'll be on our feed, our 3YPC feed. You want to find our 3YPC feed? It's 3 yards per carry anywhere you get your podcasts. Or you can go to our Twitter account. That's the number 3 yards per carry. And they'll be on there. So I do a show daily during training camp, and I will not miss a single practice. I'm going to Tampa. So I'm going to Tampa. I'm going to see those joint practices. By the way, the Dolphins are doing joint practices with every team that they're facing in training camp this year. So they're doing joint practices with the Falcons, the Commanders, and the Tampa Bay Bucks.
Well, I look forward to reading it. I look forward to speaking with you more as this offseason rolls on. And I look forward to getting back to talking about football, Chris, because we've been over here just spinning plates, just kind of being dickheads behind microphones with alcohol for way too long. It's criminal that they let us get away with this, right?
Yeah, get to the subject.
Our listeners hate us, Elf, and I love it.
And by the way, for any Sabres fans that are watching this, I thought it was going to feel good. It feels better than good. Let me just say that.
For those of you listening to the audio only, he has a replica Stanley Cup now as a Florida Panthers fan sitting on his desk with all this Miami stuff. I bet you that feels good. All I can hope...
It feels absolutely insane. It feels great. It really does.
Guys, all I can hope is that one day we get to taste a little bit of that, but for tonight, we got to get the hell out of here. I'm Drew Gear, that's Chris Kruger, that's Alf Arteaga, and this has been your AFC's Roundup.
All right, all done.
Chris, he was messing